Deputy Brid Smith on behalf of AAPBP. 3 minutes.
Taoiseach, I notice that your government is taking a very tough line on pay demands from workers. And I notice also, very interestingly, that you're being joined by great moral upbraiders in this country, such as John Moran, Mr Austerity himself, in taking this tough line. You're being joined in a chorus as well by the Minister sitting next to you, Leo Varadkar, who claims that if workers keep demanding these pay rises, then recipients of social services will suffer. And I want to utterly condemn this approach by Minister Varadkar, by the Government and by others outside the Government, and also former Government employees. The argument has always been put that there is no money available outside the Lansdowne Road Agreement until 2018, that the economy would go back to the dark days of austerity. The recent 4% claim by the private sector indeed has thrown another bit of fuel onto the furnace of pay demands. And let us remember that Lewis drivers who were private sector attained a pay increase of 18%. Recently, contract cleaners got a pay increase of 10%. A modest 4% is what's been asked. Taoiseach, I welcome this. We on this side of the House welcome the fact that workers have woken up and are beginning to say to the Government and to this state that they have taken the pain and the cuts for long enough and it's payback time. I also know, Taoiseach, that profits and wealth have restored to 2008 levels. So I want to put it to you that the argument that we're making in this House, that the Government are making, that workers must show restraint, that there can be no pay equality, that there can be no restoration of Lansdowne Road pay deals, is utter hypocrisy when we have just voted ourselves a €5,000 pay increase. We're giving the Gardaí €3,000 in January. So what the hell is wrong with giving nurses, teachers and other workers who work at the coalface a decent restoration of their pay and giving them pay equality? What's happening here is that there's a pay revolt taking place and you guys can't stomach it. We welcome it because we believe it is not private versus public and it is not worker versus social welfare recipient. If the boat lifts for any section of workers, it lifts for everybody. And we can cut across the nonsense that the fiscal space doesn't allow it, because you've just managed to give a €600 million VAT concession to the hospitality industry. I only have to mention the bitter fruit of Apple, the $13 billion that you said, no thanks, we don't want it, and up to $4 billion that is uncollected in effective corporation tax rate, and they're just a few of them, combined with the loopholes you gave to the developers and landlords in the last budget. You don't seem to have a problem with restraining rent, with restraining insurance costs, but you want to restrain workers' pay. Now, I put it to you, Taoiseach, that there's a lot of hypocrisy and moral upbraiding of working-class people going on here, and that it's time that a real look at the question of pay. Workers, after all, spend their money. They don't have offshore tax havens. They put it back into the economy. And Taoiseach, you need to address this question urgently.
Well, I listened very carefully to what you have said. I never heard you mention the fact that unemployment has dropped from 15.2 to below 8%. I never heard you mention the fact that thousands of jobs have been created in the past number of years. I never heard you mention the fact that the proposal of government is to provide jobs throughout the country, 200,000 new jobs between here and 2020, 135,000 outside Dublin. And I never heard you say that the best route out of poverty is a job and an opportunity for a career. Now, you seem to have a view that you can have a conveyor belt of borrowed money to pay everybody and just get on as we were before. We're not heading down that road again, Deputy. Country went over the edge. 100,000 people lost their jobs. Emigration by the thousand. Construction sector collapsed. It affected every single household in the country. And what the Minister for Public Expenditure is trying to do, after the decisions made and the sacrifices made by all the workers over a 5-6 year period to rectify the country, is to keep us moving in a forward direction that's well managed and that is not going to lose control over what we had. All of the public sector workers you speak of, all of them, and the vast majority, accepted sacrifices because of the economic situation that we're in. And the Lansdowne Road Agreement had 280,000 public servants agree on a process by which the financial emergency restrictions could begin to be dealt with. And that's the position that the Minister for Public Expenditure has outlined on many occasions. I note the decision by the private sector unions, but I make the point to you that what we have to do as a country is to keep our costs down, make it easier for people to have jobs and get into employment. That's why we need to continue to focus both on dealing with the low-paid commission in respect to the minimum wage, and for those who are paying 50% tax to have the income tax reduced where that's possible. You can only do that, Deputy, if you've got an engine. We're all inundated with requests for hospitals and primary care centres and schools and housing and expansion of infrastructure right across the country. We do not have the resources to do all these things, and the only way we can hope to give our people, all of our people, an opportunity is to have a well-managed economy, and that requires making choices. You say that you're taking a very tough line on workers. I respect the sacrifices that workers have made. I respect the work that they do, and what we want to do is to be fair to everybody in the decisions that government will make. But you don't seem to see that.
1 minute, Deputy Smith.
Yeah, Taoiseach, I absolutely see it, and we welcome every job. But what good is a job to workers when they can't afford to put a roof over their head, when they can't afford to pay their car insurance, when they're struggling every day and getting into more and more debt? You see, Taoiseach, what you don't address is the fundamental issue of the inequality that runs through all of my argument. And my argument is based on the fact that you are benefiting at the sacrifice of workers, nurses, teachers, private sector workers, all workers and recipients of social welfare. You are benefiting the giant corporations, the vulture funds, the REITs, the developers and the landlords. Every measure you took in the budget was to allow them benefit from the fiscal space, not from ordinary working people whom you acknowledge did make the sacrifices. And all your platitudes will make no difference to the nurses who, when they see the guards getting an extra €3,000 in January, we get an extra €5,000. Why should they stay back in the shadows and say, well, I'm going to continue to work these extra hours for nothing, and I'm going to be restrained in my pay? And the same goes for the private sector workers. You don't have an answer to the inequality at the heart of this system. The fiscal space is there. You have never bothered to broaden it, and that is the problem that we have. And people are not stupid. They see it, and that's why there's a pay revolt, which we welcome in this country.
Well, I said to you, the situation was absolutely dire a number of years ago. It's still very difficult, but some improvements have been made. For instance, nurses being trained now and qualifying are all being offered permanent contracts. The incremental grades that were taken away in the past have been restored. Obviously, the intention of government is to employ more teachers because of the growing number of primary and secondary school students around. As I pointed out yesterday, for the first time in 9 years, almost 40 million was pumped into the third-level sector as part of a strategy to provide sustainable employment for those. As the Minister for Public Expenditure has pointed out, anybody on under 25,000 will have their reductions fully restored, and so they should. And the priority is for the lower paid, and obviously for those on middle-income earners have received some benefits in the budget in terms of income tax. So for nurses, Gardaí, teachers, all of the others, these are all providing important work for the country. You mentioned about having the benefits of corporations. Obviously, 200,000 people are employed directly by corporations and many more besides. But it's also the many people who are privately employed in small and medium enterprises who struggle every day, who are now faced with increased competitiveness in exporting to Britain and other locations. We've got to be fair to everybody across the board here, Deputy, and that's where the government will respond collectively and in fairness.
I have also to be fair to all.